Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls online video with me, Sherman. Today guys, I bring you guys a new tank build for the Warden class, the Deathknight tank. Now I did release this build as a solo build in the Murkmire update, but I wanted to see what I could do with it if I made it into a tank build and how better it would be if, you know, working this way versus the other. So let's get right into it. So as you can see guys, we are a Nord Warden for this. Nord is going to be the best choice for this because of the extra resistances that the race brings. So you aren't going to get a super large amount of resistances, about 27k, 26k. With being a Nord, if you are any other race, you have to change the monster set. And the monster set that we're running really fits this kind of build, so I kind of prefer with the Nord myself. So as you can see, we have 17k max magic, 32k health, 29k max stam. We have an 893 mag recovery with a 585 stam recovery. The stam recovery is a little low, but that's okay because we are playing a two-handed tank with this build, so it means more two-handed attacks for more light and heavy attacks done with two-handed. More heavy attacks than light attacks, but you can do quite a few light attacks if you need to, but it's mainly for the heavy attacks for resource return. We do have a 2211 weapon damage with a 35% weapon critical. If there was a way I could get the critical higher, I would, guys, but unfortunately, I can't. So, we do have, like I said, the 21,896 spell resist with 21,533 physical, and I am going to show you real quick what this thing looks like buffed up with the resistances. Here you guys go, 27k spell, 26k physical. This is going to be good for this type of a tank build. Now remember, this is not a main tank for trials. This would be an off tank for trials. And it does work really well. And before you even say how are you supposed to tank axes with this, you don't. You actually tank the boss while somebody with a sword and shield tanks the axes. That's where things differ here, and when it comes to certain boss encounters where it requires you to block a lot more, this tank just doesn't fill that role very well, but it can tank a lot of the content. It can tank all normal dungeons, all veteran dungeons, including DLC dungeons. You might have a few difficulties with, like, Runes of Mazatoon because of the AoE ground effects, and you might have a few problems with Bloodroot Forge. But other than that, most of the other dungeons are very doable with this build. The Trials, Hellrust Citadel, the Ethereum Archive, Sanctum Ophidium, even Viamaw, and Halls of Fabrication are also doable with this. Asylum Sanctorium can be really difficult, to be honest. If you're main tanking, it's better to off tank with this and that. And just like with some of those other trials, it's good to off tank and main tank at certain times with this build. And before I get any further, before you guys say, well, I don't see the orbs from Ebon, you can use Ebon Armory for this, but if you do that, you have to switch to Imperial to get that good amount of health and everything. But then you lose the benefit of this build the way it's put together. So let's go ahead and move on down. We are using the Thief Mundus Stone, and we do have Tri-Stat Food. Now again, like I said, this build is made for off-tanking. It is not made for main tanking. So, let's go in here to the sets. Now, you can main tank dungeons, like I said. It's just in trials, you cannot main tank. So going over this food real quick, we are using Tri-Stat Food and we are using Tri-Pots. That's going to be the best option for this build. Now over the sets, starting with the monster set, we are using Iceheart. Iceheart I find to be one of the best sets for this particular build. But you can use Lord Warden if you do not have the higher resistances. Lord Warden is going to be the trade-off. And if you are using Lord Warden and you're playing an Imperial, I would suggest going reinforced on the chest as well, as having the helm and the leggings infused, with the chest being reinforced. Alright, So with this set, as you can see, the one piece is spell crit, not really needed, but it does come in handy with some of the abilities we do use. But it's the two-piece bonus. When you deal critical damage, you have a 20% chance to gain a damage shield that absorbs 9,976 damage for 6 seconds. While the damage shield holds, you deal 1,062 frost damage to all enemies within 5 meters of you every 1 second. This effect can occur every 6 seconds. Now, in my playtesting of this build and actually playing this build on live, I can actually keep this up, not 100%, but about 89% of the time to 95% of the time, depending on how well I can keep trash around me, and I can keep my abilities proccing on them, doing dots and stuff. The more dots I have going on, the greater chance this has of proccing. The next set we are using, and also, just so you guys know, we are running 2 Nirnhone, 2 Reinforced, Rest Infused with this build. If I was playing an Imperial and I was running Lord Warden, I'd still run the same, except the chest, I would be running Reinforced. So, moving on to the other set. The next set we're using is Night Mother's Gaze. Night Mother's Gaze is a really good set for tanks that don't have Major Fracture, or the ability to apply Major Fracture. It's a really good set for them to use, especially two-handed tanks, and this is where Nords really shine. So, as you can see, the 2-piece and 4-piece weapon critical, 3 pieces weapon damage. The 5-piece, when you deal critical damage, you apply Major Fracture to the enemy, reducing their physical resistance by 5,280 for 6 seconds. Now, I know what a lot of people are going to say. What about Major Breach? Your healers, most of the time, are running the Destruction Staff ability that gives Major Breach, so you can actually, you have to rely a little bit on them to do the weakness to elements, and then morphed in elemental drain element or whatever it is, to where they give resources back, magic resources. If your healer is running that particular skill, you don't have to worry about it, because they will be keeping that up pretty much 100%. So you'll have Major Fracture, they'll have Major Breach. And yes, you can keep Major Fracture up 100% with this setup. So, moving on to the final set, we are running Plague Doctors. The reason I chose Plague Doctors over Ebon is because when I ran Ebon with this, I can only get to about 30k health and 28k stamina with a Nord. And that's because of the way the health pools and stuff work. But with Plague Doctors, I can reach a higher health pool without sacrificing too much. So it's a really good benefit. The other nice thing is that with Plague Doctors, you do get the 4% healing taken, and you get the 2 and 3 piece extra health. We are running 2 healthy on the jewelry and 1 infused, and I will go over the traits on the gear here in a second with the enchants. But we are running a mag recovery here. Now over to the gear itself, again, the traits and the enchants. We are running 3 infused on the bigger pieces, the helm, chest, and legs, with tri-stat glyphs. This is going to give us extra magicka, extra health, and extra stamina. And then on the shoulders and boots, we're running reinforced with max stam enchants. And then the belt and gloves are Nirnhoned with max stam enchants. The Nord doesn't need a lot of health. If you were playing any other race, I would suggest going health here in these ones, except Imperial. Imperial and Nord can actually pull ahead with the stamina. Now, the nice thing about being a Nord is when you activate one of your abilities, sorry, wrong one. When you activate one of your abilities, you do get that 10% health benefit, and as you can see, we go to 35k max health. That is almost perfect for tanking 90% of the content. There is going to be some content where you might struggle with 35k health, but once you become experienced with this build, then it's no longer a problem. So you want to run Nirnhoned on the small pieces, the gloves, and the belt, because that's going to give you the higher amount of resistances from them. And then you want to run Reinforced on the shoulders and the boots, because that's going to give you higher resistances. When you play a two-handed tank versus a sword and board tank, you have to rely on shields a lot. So you want as many kind of shields as you can stack to help mitigate damage. And shields, the way they stack is, so for example, this build uses Brawler, Bone Shield, and the Ice Heart. if my Ice Heart procs first, then I get my Brawler, then I get my Bone Shield. It has to tear through the Ice Heart shield first, then the Brawler shield, then the Bone Shield itself, before Bone Shield will be removed. And in total, you can get about a 29k shield out of this build. So almost as much as you have in health. Moving on to the weapons. We are running a two-handed Night Mother's Gaze sword with a... and I do want to mention this. On the Plague Doctors, if you are running this particular build or running Eben, it is better to run it this way. Run 3 jewelry and the boots and the gauntlets in that set. So if you're running Eben, run the boots and gauntlets with the jewelry. And if you're running Plague Doctors, the same thing. And always make the necklace infused with a magic recovery, because you will need that magic recovery coming in order to sustain a lot of your magic capabilities. Now onto the weapon. We are running a two-handed sword. Axe is good as well if you want to apply another dot to keep critting your monster set. If you aren't running this and you're running Lord Warden, you don't have to worry about it as much. You still need that higher weapon critical in order to get the Night Mother's Gaze to hit, to apply the Major Fracture. But it's not that hard. So we are running an Infused Crusher enchant with the two-handed. The nice thing about running two-handed is you can still run the Infused Crusher and get the full benefit of it. The next set we are the next weapon we are running is a bow on the back bar. You can run Ice Staff. I will tell you this now. You can run Ice Staff, but you will be resource starved for Magicka. The reason I run the bow is because it's easier to run, and I'm not as resource starved, because we have a lot more stamina than we do max Magicka. Alright, so the bow is weakening enchant, and it's infused. So when you drop your Endless Hail, it will keep weakening applied to the enemies. It would be nice if you had minor maim, but since we don't, weakening will take its place. Alright, now moving on to these skills, guys. And before I get too far into the skills, make sure, I'm going to just say it now, make sure you get all your class passives, especially for this particular build setup. You want to have all those class passives because you will be playing off each of those passives no matter what. So looking at the front bar, we have, or looking at the rest of our skills, passives, we have all the two-handed passives, we have all the bow passives, and if you are using a Destruction Staff, I would suggest an Ice Staff with all the passives. Armor-wise, light armor, the top 3 passives, medium armor, the top 2 and the bottom 1, and then with heavy armor, you want all of them. The reason you want the light armor passives, all the top 3, this one will give you extra spell resist. This one's going to give you increased magic recovery, which I know a lot of people are like, yeah, but that's only 4%. But the way this build is set up, we actually have 14% mag recovery, and we want that higher mag recovery, so that's really important. This also reduces the cost of magic abilities by 2%. And then we have the Grace thing, which reduces sprint costs and gives us that snare removal of 4%. It's not much, but it does play a part. And then over here in the medium armor, same thing. We get a little bit of extra crit on our weapon critical, and then on our Windwalker, we get 4% stam recovery and then the 2% reduced cost. But it's the athletics that we really want for the movement speed thing for the medium armor and the reduced dodge roll. So heavy armor, you just want them all. Now, when it comes to world skills, I've been asked this. Can you be a vampire with this? Yes, you can. Is it as effective? No, it's not. But you can still play a vampire with this build. It works out to some degrees better because the 50% damage reduction when you drop to a certain percentage of health really plays well with it. But at the same time, fire damage does do a lot more to you. And it does apply, that damage does apply to your shields as well. So fire stuff will burn through your shields really quick. So I usually don't play a vampire with this. So soul magic, I always get these bottom 2 just for the purposes of questing and stuff. When it comes to guild stuff, Fighters Guild, you want to make sure you fill in all the passives because you are using Flawless Dawnbreaker on the front bar. This will not only give you 5% extra weapon damage, it'll give you an extra 3%, taking you up to 8% extra weapon damage. And Banish the Wicked is going to give you ultimate gen whenever you kill an undead, Daedra, or werewolf. And then Intimidating Presence just for questing. And then the other ones are just in case you do those those kind of things. You don't really need the bottom two, but I still take them. Mage's Guild, you just need Persuasive Will. You can use Psijic Order abilities with this build, but there's really no reason with the way this build is set up. You almost self-sustain. So, Undaunted, you're going to want to get the Undaunted passives and these two skills, which I'll get to in a little bit. Moving on to Assault, just Aggressive Warhorn, and then Support. You can take Barrier if you want it, but it's not really necessary. And then make sure you fill in all your racial passives, especially if you're playing no matter what you're playing, you always want to fill in your racial passives. On to Crafting, Alchemy, Medicinal Use, and then on Provisioning, Gourmand, and Connoisseur. These are very important ones. The food buffs from Provisioning are going to increase the length of time your food lasts, and the Alchemy one will reduce the respawn of your potions down to a lot less. So make sure you get those. Alright, now, starting with the skills on the bar. On the main bar, we have Brawler. This is here to give you a nice AoE cleave with damage, a little bit of damage over time. This is going to help you keep your Ice Heart proccing. But the main reason why we have this is it does give us a damage shield for 2,225 damage for 8 seconds, and each enemy hit increases the strength of the shield by 100%. But that's not the main reason. This is right here. We're going to go ahead and buff up. We do have Rally, and Rally is also going to boost the strength of the shield by 2,405 instead of 2,225. So this is going to give you almost 200 more extra shield strength. Moving on to the next ability we have. This is one that's going to confuse people because I've been asked this many a times. Why do you use this on a DPS, or like not a DPS, but on a tank? In this particular setup, and that is Gripping Shards. Now, Gripping Shards is an amazing CC Immobilize. This ability has a 6-meter range around you. Anyone who steps into it has a chance, or has reduced movement speed. Anyone who's in the area while you're casting is immobilized for 3 seconds. It does do damage over time. It's not a large amount, and it's based on your max health. Next ability we have is Spike Bone Shield. Spike Bone Shield, really powerful shield, and it's a nice synergy for your group. So you can apply this shield to yourself, and it's 34% of your max health for 6 seconds, and it returns 45% of any direct damage you absorb back to the enemy. So even if they're shooting you with a staff at ranged, as long as it's considered direct damage, they will take 45% of that damage back. So this is a great way to help bring down enemies as well as keeping yourself alive. Next ability we have is Rally. Rally is our main, primary, and only heal we use most of the time. And the reason why we use this ability is, as you can see, focus your strength to gain major brutality for increasing weapon damage by 20%. That weapon damage applies to one of our abilities, and that's our Brawler, to increase our shield strength. But it also heals you every 2 seconds while active, and it heals you for an additional 1,353 health when Rally expires. But the final heal is increased by up to 564% in proportion to the length of time Rally has been active. You want to keep Rally all the time applied to you, because if you do get hit really hard, you can pop this and it can heal you to max health, depending on the severity of the wounds. Next ability we have is Inner Beast. You can use the other morph, that's the Magicka morph, but I prefer using Inner Beast because I don't mind wasting or utilizing the stamina to taunt enemies. In most cases, I can keep a taunt applied to multiple targets in dungeons, in trials, and things like that. It just depends on the situation, without wasting stamina, because I'll usually throw a taunt, heavy attack, throw a taunt, heavy attack, throw a taunt, heavy attack, and then every time I throw a heavy attack, I get the resource back of what it costs to taunt. So, and this is also can be a synergy as well, so it's really nice. Next ability we have on our bar is Flawless Dawnbreaker. We do not use this unless we're solo playing, we're playing in quests or something like that. We'll use this. Otherwise, you just have it here for the 5% weapon damage. Moving on to the back bar. On the back bar, first ability we have is Silver Leash, and this is just to pull enemies to you. If they're at ranged and you want to get them close to AoE damage or whatever, this is how you do it. You drag them to you and let them sit in that, soak that AoE damage from your allies, yourself, whatever, and it just brings them down really quick. If you don't need this ability, you can also change that out for the bow ability Venom Arrow, and this is also really good because any ranged enemies that are casting, you can also interrupt them and set them off balance and stun them for 3 seconds. So it's a really good CC, stun, immobilize, all that stuff. It's really good. And it does the off balance and the interrupt will work on bosses, just not the stun. So, and it only works on certain abilities that bosses use. Alright, moving on to the next ability, which is Endless Hail. This is how we're going to keep our weakening applied to targets. So it will only apply weakening to one target at a time, but if you're just fighting a boss, you can keep weakening on them in like pretty much 100%. If there's any trash that becomes involved, try to make sure to hit your boss with a light attack from your bow before you drop Endless Hail. Because if you hit the boss with the weakening, Endless Hail will keep it applied to the boss. Next ability we have is Green Lotus. This is here because it does do a heal anytime you light or heavy attack, and it heals you or a nearby ally. But the main reason why we have it is that Major Savagery. This is how we're going to keep our crit at a higher rate. So this will allow us to proc our monster stat, Ice Heart, a lot. So you do have to keep this up pretty much non-stop in order to keep that crit chance up there. The next ability we have is Bullnetch. This is an instant cast and it costs no magicka. You will keep this up pretty much 100% of the time, but Bullnetch will give you extra stamina for the duration. For 27 seconds, it'll give you 5,376 stamina. It's like 100 and something a second. It's not very much, but it's enough to get you through. And then the 20, it does give you Major Brutality and Major Sorcery, which is really nice with this because the only ability we have that is going to be affected by Major Sorcery or Major Brutality is pretty much all of our abilities except for this one. And this is not affected by Major Sorcery. So just letting you know, this is only affected by your max health. So if you have Rally going, then this ability goes up to the 977. It can get up to 1,000 points in damage, but only in rare occasions. And that's if the enemy has no spell resist whatsoever. So the last ability we have is our buff for our armor resistance, and that is Ice Fortress. Now, Ice Fortress has an 8-meter range. It can be applied to 11 targets. So if you apply this right away to your group before you go running into a room to tank a boss or something, you can keep Major Warden, Major Resolve applied to all your group members, which is kind of nice. If not, anyone within 8 meters of you will get this, so most of the time it's just your Stam DPS, and this will give you Major Resolve, Major Ward, increasing spell and physical resist by 5,280 for 24 seconds, and this does apply to multiple people, but you yourself gain minor protection, reducing damage taken by 8%. Since they changed the Nord to 6% damage reduction to the 4,000 physical and spell resist, this plays better now on the Nord than ever before. And with the Warden, it's awesome. So lots of damage reduction and lots of resistances. Next ability we have is Aggressive Warhorn, and we just have this here for group purposes. So if we're solo playing, we don't really use it that much. When we're playing in a group, we're going to be firing this off quite a bit. Now, a lot of people are going to ask, why aren't you using the Winter's Embrace ability, Arctic Wind, or Crystallized Shield for like your self-heal and stuff like that? This is really good heal, but for this type of build, Rally works better. This is really good for ultimate gen, don't get me wrong, but again, you need a ranged taunt, and you need a taunt. So you'd have to give up your taunt to take this, and it's really not worth it, unless you're using an Ice Staff on the back bar. And if you are using an Ice Staff on the back bar, then you can put that Crystallized Shield here, morphed into the Shimmering Shield, which is going to be your best bet. You can use Shimmering Shield. And like I said, you can use this instead of Rally, Polar Winds. It's nice, but it doesn't heal as much. So, as you can see, this will heal for 6,000 up front and 914 over time. And then Rally itself will actually heal for more because you're stamina based. And with being stamina based, you really want that greater stamina heal. So as you can see, this heals for 1676, and then it heals for an abundant amount if you need it. Like if you need to reapply this, and you can reapply it within, say, 12 or 15 seconds or something. I'll show you guys what I'm talking about when it gets down to the 15-second timer. I'll pop it again. And you'll see I get like 9k health back. In some cases you can't even get it. If it crit heals, you can get up to like 18k. So it's really powerful for that purpose, to keep yourself alive. And when you have all your shields going, it doesn't matter, because your shields are going to absorb a lot of that damage while the heals are doing the rest. So while your heals are just keeping you alive, your shields are going to take care of most of the damage you take. So, back to Aggressive Warhorn. Aggressive Warhorn, we have this for group play. Like I said, it increases max stam and max magicka by 10% for 30 seconds. But it also gives you and your group members major force, increasing critical damage done by 15%. So that critical damage does apply to you, but it's not going to be a whole lot. But it still plays well with you in the sense that it will help you stay alive. So, or not stay alive, but it will help you with your damage output. It's just not going to be a whole lot because you're not focused on being a DPS, but it is kind of nice to have. Alright, so that's it for the skills. Now we're going to jump over to the CP, starting with the red tree. It's a typical setup, guys. We have 66 in Ironclad. This is going to reduce our direct damage taken by 22%. We do have 1 into Spell Shield and 1 into Heavy Armor Focus, and I'll get to that one here in a second. But mainly because we had 2 points left over, and I split it between the two, so I didn't go over my physical resistance. Wouldn't be higher than my spell. So, moving on over here, we have 31 into Thick Skin. This is going to reduce damage taken from damage over time effects by 13%. And then we have 56 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. This is going to reduce physical poison disease damage by 12%, and this is going to reduce Flame Frost, Shock, and magic damage by 12%. But you remember that 8% damage reduction we get for Ice Fortress? That applies to Elemental Defender and Hardy. So you will go up to a 20% damage reduction there, with the other ones being applied on top of them. So like Thick Skin, for any damage over time taken, will be removed, reduced by not only 13%, by 20%. So it's 23 or 33%. And then with this, it goes up to 42% from any direct damage. And your damage reduction, for some reason, it works on some shields, but not all of them. It works on Bone Shield, and it works on Blazing, the Radiant Aura from the Templar. But it doesn't work on the DK Shield that way, and it doesn't work on the some of the other shields. But those two shields, Bone Shield and that one, are affected by damage reduction as well as resistances. So you won't take as much damage with those shields up. Moving on over here, we have 40 into Bastion. This increases the effectiveness of your damage shields by 16%. If we were using Bone Shield, it would be normally 30%. This way we get an extra 4% absorbed. So this will give us a stronger shield. And that's why we have the 40% into the Bastion there. Next, we have 19 into Quick Recovery. This is going to increase our healing received by 5%. This does not apply to our healing taken. So those are two different things. So that 4% healing taken and the 5% healing received, plus the 8% healing received we get from wearing 5 pieces of heavy armor, we actually go up to a 13% healing received with 4% healing taken. So those are two separate values, so we actually get the full heal amount, and it heals for a lot. Then we have 1 into Heavy Armor Focus, like I mentioned. Both of this Heavy Armor Focus and the Spell Shield will give us 105 extra resistances in spell and physical resist. So just because we needed the extra. Alright, moving on over to the green tree. We have 40 into Warlord. This reduces our break free cost by 16%. I have done this with 56 points in here, where we get an extra 4% And the difference is nominal. You won't really notice that 4% reduced cost. So you can get away with 40 in here. We do have 23 into Sprinter. This is going to reduce our sprint cost by 14%. Remember, we're wearing that one piece of light armor, so we get another percentage reduction. So we actually have like it's either 18 or 17% reduced there. Then we have 23 into Bashing Focus. This gives us a 14% reduced bash cost. Tanks do a lot of bashing regardless, because if they know that they have the opportunity to set somebody off balance or do that, they can do it. So that's why we have that bashing focus there. Moving on to the middle tree here, we have 43 into Mooncalf. This increases our stam recovery by 10%. Then we have 43 in Arcanus. This increases mag recovery by 10%. And with the one piece of light and medium armor, we actually go to 12% reduced magicka cost and 12% reduced, or sorry, 14% reduced magicka cost and 14 reduced stamina cost. So this or not reduced stamina cost, recovery. Sorry. So we get 14% recovery in both, and that gives us a lot more benefits to having a little bit of extra recovery rates in our character. Then we have 43 into Tenacity. This increases our magicka and stamina of our fully charged heavy attacks by 10%. This is why you can get away with using a destruction staff on the back bar, because you will get mag resources back if you heavy attack with it. And if you use a two-handed on the front bar, you'll get the stam recovery. But either way you go, bow or ice staff, you just have to watch your resources a little bit more. Moving on, we have 40 into Tumbling. This reduces dodge roll, our dodge roll cost by 16%. And then we have 15 in Shadow Ward, giving us not quite 7%. We still have just a 6% damage reduction, or block cost reduction. But we don't block a whole lot. We block certain attacks, not all of them, mainly the really heavy hitters and the ones that are going to set us off balance or interrupt us. We use this to do that, to block those. So you do want to get a little bit of block cost reduction. You can put more into here if you want, but I find this to be perfect. And since I didn't have any other place to put the residual points, I could have put them into these. Sprinter or Bashing Focus, but I find it better just to leave it where it is. Moving on to the blue tree, we have 43 into Bless. This is going to increase our healing done by 15%. We have 43 into Elemental Expert. This is going to increase our Flame Frost, Shock, and Magic damage by 10%. If you didn't know, Wardens get a 6% increase in Frost damage, so this actually gives us 16% increase in Frost damage. This is really good for us. The nice thing is that you also can put 3 points into Spell Erosion, giving you a little bit of extra spell pen, which increases your overall spell penetration to about roughly 2,500 with like a 7,500 or higher physical pen. Moving on over here in the middle tree, we have 16 into Physical Weapon Expert. This is going to increase our light and heavy attacks with the two-handed and the bow, so really nice. And then Mastered Arms, we have 40 points. This is going to increase our damage done with direct damage by 16%. But we mainly have this so we can unlock Reposit. It doesn't matter if you're using a two-handed or a sword and shield, or even a staff or a bow. You can still block attacks, and it will still have that 15% chance. So even if it's just one attack every once in a while that you block, having that 15% chance of dealing direct damage or dealing physical damage back to the enemy is really good. So I like to unlock Reposit. Moving on to the final blue tree, we have 43 into Mighty. This is going to increase your physical, poison, disease damage done by 10%. We have 40 into Thaumaturge. This is going to increase your damage over time effects. We don't really have very many damage over time effects, to be honest, besides Endless Hail, and it's not really affected that much by this. But it's still beneficial. If you are using an ice staff, though, this does play really well with it. And then we have 40 into Precise Strikes. This increases our critical damage and critical healing done with stamina abilities by 16%. I forgot, Thaumaturge does apply to the Brawler bleed over time. And if you are using a two-handed axe, it does apply to that as well, to its bleed damage that it does. And then we have 2 into Piercing. This is just to increase our physical penetration. And that is it for the CP. And yeah, So that's it for the build and stuff, but I do want to show you guys how well this build can work in the right hands. So what we're going to do next is we're going to take a little trip down to Maw of Lorcage in veteran mode. And I will show you guys just me tanking up the first group of trash in there, so you guys can see for yourselves how effective this build can be, even with multiple enemies on you. Now remember, this is veteran, so it's not going to reflect everything, but it does give you an idea, a general idea of how well this build can work as a tank and stuff like that, with mitigating damage, all that stuff. And I do have to get on the bow side first. Now, somebody has asked me in the past, could you use defending weapons? Yes, you can. It will give you more resistances, but to be honest, with the way this build is set up and the way the Warden works with the 8% damage reduction and everything else, it just works a lot better in some cases. So here we go. We're going to go ahead and buff ourself up. And start dropping our stuff here. And you want to keep heavy attacking. Do not stop heavy attacking if you can help it, because you want to keep as much stuff going off as possible, especially like this, because if you didn't notice, a lot of those enemies all of a sudden became immobilized because I did the ice there. So that means they cannot move. This is a great way to keep that trash on you in that situation. I'm going to go ahead and drop a minor main here in a second, but I want to get my rally going. So there's my minor main. I'm going to rebuff all my stuff here. Go ahead and pop rally. I'm going to do all these again and then swap bars. I'm going to get my buffs going one more time, and then I'm going to drop Endless Hail. I'm going to use Warhorn. And as you can see, we also got a 32k max stamina, which is really good for us because it allows us to keep those resources coming in. Like I said, if you need to use a ranged taunt to get an enemy's attention, or you need to pull an enemy to you, don't be afraid to use that stamina that you have there. So and as you saw, I just did 3 taunts there, so I could taunt all 3 of them and keep them on me. And it didn't use that much of my max stam as you would think. So, and I could just easily get it back because I can pretty much tank out most of that damage, like I said. Now, the one thing that's going to suck about this is in here, in Maw of Lorcage, is there is an enemy that does put down a thing that stops magic damage from firing off, so you cannot use your ice ability that immobilizes. So you got to be really careful when you're fighting that particular opponent. So alright, so we got rebuffed up. I'm going to go ahead and taunt that one and that guy, and then I'm going to taunt him. And you guys will see here in a second, like, this is going to be crazy, because you think that a lot of the time shields just don't absorb enough, and I hear people say this. Yeah, I died. But people tell you shields don't absorb enough damage. They do. They work fine in trials, especially if you have a good amount of resistances. Most of the time they'll absorb most of the attacks that you'll take. But because I was CC'd and I burned through a lot of my resources there, it didn't really reflect how well this build can really work. And this build can work really good in here. I've used it a whole bunch of times in this place. And not only this build, but also a Templar build that runs very similar. So, but yeah, both Templars, Wardens, DKs, Sorks, all of them can play two-handed tanks really well. It just depends on how you have them set up, including Nightblades. But again, it really depends on how you have them set up, what gear you're using, what sets, how you're trying to utilize sets and your group makeup, that kind of thing. And two-handed tanking is just different, and this is why a lot of people say that it's not as effective, is because not a lot of people really understand how two-handed tanking works because they've never really played it. But if you play it enough and you become accustomed to it, it's like second nature, and it just becomes a lot easier the more you do it. So, just like with anything. But that's pretty much it for the build, guys. I hope you guys like it. If you do, you know what's coming next. Go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys want to see more builds by me, you can subscribe. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day. And this guy might see you in game. Bye.